What is up, everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Eternal Journey, the podcast that talks about all things Eternal with a focus on limited play. I'm your host, Caesar the Crowd Pleaser, aka Jedi, and today for episode 11, we're going to be talking about Site Survey. That's right, we're going to be going into the freshly released mechanic, which is Site, or card type, which are Site. But let's go ahead and I just want to mention our YouTube channel, EJthePodcast on YouTube. That's right. That's where you can get all the other great recorded content that I am putting out, to include draft videos, forge videos for beginners, constructed decks breakdowns, and Singleton Sundays. That's right. Series where I starting to push for development of kind of like a MTG Commander style format. I'm recording games and posting them on there for you to enjoy. And then, the occasional pack opening and stuff like that. So definitely check it out at EJ the Podcast on YouTube. All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's go ahead and dive right into our pack one, pick one for today. Cracking open our pack of Defiance. For the commons, we started off with Kasul Huntman, the 1/3 Explorer Gunslinger for 2 and a blue with Renowned Killer. Yeah, it's fine. Not exciting, but it'll do its job. It's been surprisingly well if you get to trigger Renown with a good, solid weapon on it. Next up, Lost Scroll. Not really big in limited, so we're going to pass over that. Broken Wing Brawler, 3/3 Valkyrie for 5 and a green with Pledge and Empower against Flying and Warcry. Used to be a 3/4. I think the nerf to it, putting it as a 3/3, does kind of hurt it a little bit. 3 attack or 3 power is more common in flyers than it. So it having 4 going down to 3 makes it a lot more vulnerable. So it's alright, but I don't think I'd take a 5-drop this early. Next up, we have Curator Spear. This is the 2/1 relic, a weapon for 2 and a shadow, and summon. If you own another relic, it gets a +1 attack. This card's just fine. It's typically kind of fills the slot of like a talent or whatnot, where you're just kind of taking out a pesky flyer or some utility ground creature with it. Nothing special. Still probably gonna take the Huntsman. Next up, we have Rotorsmith, 2/2 for 3. Empower, gain 1 armor. Not really exciting. Ooh, here we go. Conflagrate, 2 power, fast spell for 2 and a red. It deals 3 damage to any unit, once again at fast speed. And if you amplify 5, you get to deal 3 damage to an additional enemy unit. So of note, you can't stack 6 double damage on the same unit, and you can't go to someone's face, but it's still a fantastic card. I think this card goes in every deck that has fire in it, and it's just great all around, and it works even great in multiples. So yeah, Conflagrate's the pick here. Second to last, we have Iron Hook. One fills in the slot of Curious Spirit, just a little more expensive, a little more diverse. Meh, not excited. Ooh, Infused Guardian, 4/4 Sentinel for 5 and a time. Endurance, Pledge, and Empower, +1/+1 permanently. It is a solid card as well, but I think it is comparable to Conflagrate, but I think the removal spell is stronger, especially cheaper. It's more flexible, so we're still taking Conflagrate. Going into the uncommons, we have Reclusive Scholar, the 0/6 and Primal that gives you a Cobalt Ring. Meh. A Steel-Eyed Pistolier. This is a 3/3 for 3 Renowned. Steel-Eyed Pistolier deals double damage. That is a solid pick. I'm okay with that as well. 3/3 for 3. Its baseline is still solid, but once again, don't really think that is going to beat out Conflagrate. And lastly, our last uncommon is a 2/2 Temple Artisan. Yeah, not feeling it. So let's see if the rare can dethrone Conflagrate. We have Savagery. This is a slow spell for 1 triple primal. Ooh. Give one of your units Killer and Overwhelm. Yeah, this card recently saw some constructed play in one of Knife Bloom's ECQ decks, but it's the triple primal makes it a very hard commitment. I think I took it twice and I've cut it twice, so forgive me. Yep, Conflagrate is the pick here. All right, cool, guys. Well, that is pretty much it. So let's go right into our main topic, which is our site survey. So let's start off at the very ground floor. What are sites? Sites are the latest card type that was created in Defiance. They are legendaries, and let me load it up real quick so I could get a number for you. 1 second. Legendary and site. All right, there we go. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different sites. That's right. So 6 sites that you can pick and choose from. 3, 4. Yeah. Why do I have an extra one? Oh, foil. Okay. All right. So they are a new card type. They stand alone. Baseline, they take up 2 slots on the battlefield. So when you play them, they will line up in the center of your battlefield and take up 2 slots that you cannot use now with units. You can only have 1 in play at a time. That's right. So this means that if you have 1 in play and you want to play a second one, you're going to have to destroy the first one on your own, saving your opponent the trouble of doing so. So that is something to take in consideration as well. Next up, they each have a static ability. This is an ability that's going to stay and happen, or either stay in play all the time, or will happen as long as the site is in play. It will trigger. For example, Dizzo's Office gives all your units lifesteal for the extent that Dizzo's Office is in play. Another popular one is Howling Peak. When you play a unit, it gets a +2 health until your next turn. So gives it on your turn once it comes into play, carries over all across your opponent's turn, and then when it's back to your turn, it loses that +2 health. So they all have some type of ability like this. Some are more useful, some are less useful. It does create a type of synergy if you build around it as well. Each site has an agenda, which is 3 spells that you may cast once per turn in any order, and you cannot repeat the spell. So each site is going to have with 3 spells. As soon as you play it and it comes into play, you're able to select. It will give you the pop-up menu of all 3 spells. You'll be able to pick one. It will cast that one, and a card copy of that spell will go into your void. Then you'll go all the way. Your opponent will take their turn, and then when it comes back to your turn, at the very beginning of your turn, that pop-up menu will come up again with that first spell being X'd out or subdued, and then you'll have to pick from the 2 spells that are left. So you'll do that across 3 turns. All right, so that is somewhat card advantage, which we'll talk about later. And then the final mode, when the agenda is complete, so the 4th turn that the site is in play, it will complete its cycling and summon the legendary unit that comes or that is attached to that site. So for example, Regis Tomb will summon Elias, and Torgov's trading post will, of course, surprise summon Torgov. So once this happens, the site is not destroyed. It will remain in play until it is removed by either you or your opponent. So how does this happen? Each site has a set amount of durability, I think is the keyword that Direwolf is using, and it is a white number in a center green panel in the middle of the site. You range from 2 to 4 at the moment is well. We'll see that could change in the future. And they pseudo act. No, they're not really another player. So either or. The reason why I say this is because of the fact that they take up a combat step if you decide to attack them. What this means is if every time you attack a site or your opponent attacks a site, they have to choose between attacking everything, sending everything at the site, or sending everything at the face. You cannot split your damage. So if you have, let's say, 3 units, you can't send 2 to the site and 1 to your opponent's face. It has to be either or. So that is relevant and something to consider. All right, so those are the basic foundations of what a site is. This is a limited focus podcast, so I will go ahead and go into some of the limited stipulations and applications of these sites. First off, right off the bat, because they're legendary, you're not going to be seeing them very often. So I want to go ahead and just throw it out there that 9 out of 10 times it is correct to take the site. I say this because A, it is a legendary, so you possibly need it for your collection if you are pseudo free to play. Next, it is that all of them are fairly powerful, and I'll state the reasons later in this podcast. So in most cases, if you are able to splash the second color to get that site in your deck, then it is completely worth doing. The only time I would suggest, that a site, it's okay to pass it, even though I still probably wouldn't, is if you're getting it in pack 4 and it's just not dead stone cold, not in the colors you are playing. Then you have some motivation to pass on it. But like I said, if you are in one of the colors, or you haven't really locked in one of your colors and you have incentive to go into the site, then I would definitely do so. They are just that kind of valuable. So that's one of the things when it comes to picking sites. Next thing I want to mention is that you want to make sure that you have a commanding board presence to defend the site. Occasionally in limited, you will have stipulations where neither opponent is doing any, or neither player is doing anything, so you have a completely clear board, and then it is probably pseudo safe to play a site. But I do find that they are fairly vulnerable. Some do have a removal spell or a way to defend themselves attached to them, but not all of them do. So in limited, and plus in limited, let's just face it, a lot of the stuff that happens in limited is based around units and combat. So there are slim chances that you're going to be able to defend one right away if you open it down to a board with just one unit, etc., etc. So I would recommend having some type of staple board state. Either you both are top decking, or you do have a solid set of defenders, or you have a removal spell in hand and stuff like that, because the longer they're in play is when you really start to gain their value. Sometimes just playing one spell off of them is worth it, but typically you want to gain value over time with them, and that's really what's going to make the difference in the game. That being said, they are card advantage, and I say this, I'll go ahead and just bring it up now because it is going to be part of the constructed discussion. But the fact that if they remain in play, you're essentially getting 4 cards worth of value off of 1 card from your deck is huge card advantage. It is almost the equivalent of drawing cards, 4 cards, or 3 I should say, but actually even better, because you're getting those 3 cards at the cost of 0 cards from your deck. So you're essentially playing with a 48 card deck if you are able to get all the full agenda plus the legendary out of your site. So this is what makes them extremely powerful. Plus, like I said, you also get the static ability, which is incremental advantage depending on your deck. The +2 to health could potentially put one of your units out of burn range. The lifesteal can help you change combat or race math. At the end of your turn, discard a random power card from your deck that can clean up your draws later on in the game. So all these have inherent value with them that if they are not answered, especially in limited where the resources are, case in point, like I say all the time, limited, you are able to capitalize on this. And typically the legendary unit is strong enough as well to attempt to end the game. So those are the major limited stipulations on sites. It's just kind of them being legendary means you're not going to see them as often. So it's always good to kind of talk about those so you take most of the thought out of it when you are able to, or when you do see them and you don't have to war game too much. Granted, I will admit the drafting here is at your own leisure, so you can take your sweet time, read forums, and do all kinds of great things before you find out. Some are slightly build arounds, like for example, Ejin's workshop is your Oni wielding weapons deal double damage, so you might want to value Ronin or Oni or equipment a little higher when you have it. But at the same time, that's only for the static ability. All the additional spells you cast with the agenda are perfectly fine on their own. All right, so let's go into the third portion of this discussion, which is the value of sites, inherent value with them across the board, both through limited and constructed. So Number one, the static abilities come into play more often than not. And it is true, though on the surface, you might look at these things and realize that they're kind of like incremental value, but not a big deal. Truth is that in many cases, the static abilities do come in handy a lot more than you notice. Even Regent's Tomb, which is a +1 attack this turn when you play a sigil, i.e. trigger and power, actually really makes a big difference when you have units that can get trade now or get in extra damage or are big enough to kill someone else's units. It just really pays off in the long run, more often than you think, to the point, and you won't realize that till you do the typical play your cards after you attack and you realize, oh, I missed on an additional 3 damage. Or like something was big enough to attack or to trigger a draw card, like off the Minotaurs, things like that. The +2 health takes things out of burn range. It just is a thing. The biggest one, I think, is Dizzle's Office with the lifesteal. It really helps all kinds of go wide strategies and stuff like that make the game last longer, to the point where they're able to kind of capitalize on a stalled board state or even race an opponent. So that's something to think about. Even if maybe your deck doesn't have the most synergy with the static ability, it does come into play, and when you're playing against it, you should consider that as well. That is one of the reasons why, for example, the Howling Peak is so good in the mirror, because the +2 health units that come into play give your units a chance to do something prior to dying to a pumped up torch or a pumped up display of instinct. Next up, like I touched on earlier, is the fact that 3 spells for 1 card is card advantage. So even though you aren't necessarily straight up drawing cards, the fact that the longer the site stays around, you're getting a free spell turn after turn means that you are gaining card advantage over your opponent. Sometimes more than one, when they essentially might... You kill a unit, now you're going up a card on them even further because you're using a free spell from the site and taking out one of theirs. So things like that really come into play, where especially if you have multiples, if you're running construction, you have multiples of a site, every time the site triggers more than once, you're up a card. And if, like I said, if you're able to potentially take a card from your opponent, even through sabotage and things like that, then you are really ahead of the curve, and the incremental value is going to be larger and larger and increase your win percentage. The other advantage to sites is that they work very well with board wipes, and to then generate a threat. So you can time your ultimate or the final step. Like if once you hit your 3rd spell from this, and you know next turn you're gonna get your legendary, you can potentially do a board wipe or use some removal to clean up the board, and then you'll still trigger starting your turn with a threat. Granted, they won't have charge, they'll still be exhausted, but you still have the potential of getting a unit for free and then using your undepleted power to do something else, like play another site or keep up removal or play more units so you can rebuild more quickly. Or yes, I know, more quickly. Trust me, I did it on purpose. All right. 4th thing about sites is that you order the modes, or the order of the modes is quite important. So typically what you see with the ones, you will play the site and you'll use the pseudo removal spell right away. For Dizzle's Office, it's Cut Ties. For Regent's Tomb, it's Sabotage. For Howling Peaks, it's Gun Down. These essentially kind of up you. It's Viper's Bite for Praxis Arcanum. So it's these kind of things that you put into play. There's a unit in play and you're going to take it out right away to get your value. That is typically the standard, because what you will see is and actually I'll bring this up at the end of this, because this is actually going to segue to my next point. But also sometimes you have to take advantage of things, for example using the mirror image or the vengeance, swear vengeance, when you have a unit that is relevant in play. So maybe you might not necessarily do the removal spell first, or capitalizing on something that targets the opponent to break an Aegis or get it before you know they are going to play something to get a face Aegis. So things like that matter a little bit. You're not just kind of rattling off the spells in order and on autopilot. Sometimes there is that 20-30% chance that you have to do something in an order different than what you are used to. The most common one, like I said, is typically people kind of wait to play the one that targets a unit, and your opponent can capitalize on that by clearing the board when you have that one left, and then you end up just pitching it straight to the graveyard or void without any value. So you definitely want to keep that in consideration, considering what the board state looks like and what kind of removal your opponent may have. That being said, leaving the removal spell portion of the agendas can stall your opponent. So like I just said, your opponent's going to try to play around your agendas and what spells you have left and stuff like that to best limit the impact of the site. Well, if you have some kind of a board presence and you're able to, let's say, for example, bring down Dizzo's office and you use scheme first and then threaten, and you leave cut ties for the third mode, there is a potential chance that your opponent will hesitate or refrain from playing a really good unit because they know that removal spell is coming, and they rather feel like they're clever and essentially make you waste it on nothing. But you end up gaining a huge tempo because your opponent did nothing, pseudo nothing, for 2 turns while they were waiting for that to happen. And on the 4th turn, when they play their unit, you're going to get a free legendary anyways. So sometimes taking that into consideration is important and is still plays a role even if you are throwing away a free removal spell. That also, just one more point I wanted to add on that is the fact that you are putting 3 spells in your void, so that could trigger spells matter things such as Rizon or I forgot the name, but there's another legendary that cares about the units or spells that you have in your void. So that is a quick little side note that is worth taking into consideration, as well as the East Winds guide or whatnot, that when it infiltrates, you get to cast a spell from your void. Those spells do count. The ones that were casted by your site do count towards that. So a little food for thought there. Point number 6 is that it forces less than optimal plays and attempts to remove the site from your opponent, especially in limited. In limited, we realize the value of these, so you will see, and in constructed as well, if they don't have a clean answer, i.e., for example, a Heart of the Vault when you have a Regent's Tomb in play, or a Rizon when you have a Praxis Arcanum in play, or a Xenon Temple, then you will see your opponent make bad attacks, costing them a unit or 2 in order to remove the site, or maybe making a suboptimal play so they have the direct damage to remove the site. Things like that. You will catch yourself making slightly subpar blocks to keep the site alive. So that is something to take into account as well. The fact that playing a site can force less than optimal plays from both sides of the board, but since you are deciding when you play the site, you can entice that from your opponent. This is really huge and limited, where you have limited resources, and thus if they want to throw away cards to take the site out, you have the potential of still getting immense value from the site, even if it is still not, if it does not remain on the board or battlefield that often. Cool. All right, number 7, we have synergizes well with specific deck strategies. What I mean by this is, for example, Xenon Temple. When an enemy unit dies, steal it and put it into your void. This inherently negates a lot of reanimator strategies, such as the actual reanimator deck with Vara, or B, B would be FJS or Winchest, because they are running the display to get units back from their void. This cancels that. And then, of course, Maiden interacts very well with Maiden. And lastly, you have the Haunted Highway, which really values reoccurring their units. This negates that. So you can have slightly your own version of Reanimator, stealing your opponent's dead or dying units, putting them in your void, and then getting them back. things like that. The lifesteal from Digital's Office is something you could play around as well. You would see Scrappy Hour playing it, where having a bunch of units go wide allow them to get in there for a significant amount of damage, gain a significant amount of life, and then able to allow them to win the race. Once I mentioned EJthePodcast Workshop, where if you are running a Rakano Armory type deck and favor a little bit with Oni, you end up getting immensely rewarded. Essentially every weapon in your deck being pseudo steel plate-ish. So something to consider when you are building them with constructed in mind. In limited, you're a little less likely to do it unless you pretty much open up pack 1 pick 1, or pack 1 pick 2, or obviously pack 1 pick 4, or pack 4 pick 1. So you have 3 essential chances of getting the site early enough to build around, but you know, by that, if you see in pack 4, it's probably too late. It's either, but that's okay. It's just something to consider. Once again, it's not a make or break. It's not like if the site has no synergy with your deck, you're not going to run it. Typically, you're still going to run it. Fact number 8 is that sites can be pseudo life gain. What I mean by this is, as I mentioned earlier, the opponent will try to make less than optimal attacks to try to remove the site. And as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, the fact that you can only choose to attack either the site or the player. So it can negate a full-blown alpha strike or not. You never know. It sometimes they might just have one unit and they'll send the one unit, leave everything back to block. If you have open power, they may send an overabundance of units to make sure the site dies in case you have removal or a combat trick. There's all those kinds of things. But what this means is taking a whole turn off to attack a site instead of your face means that you potentially gained that much life. So if you were playing against an aggro deck and they send, for example, Rakano aggro, they send 2 units plus 1 with charge and haste that got buffed by the sharpshooter, you could potentially gain somewhere between 5 to 12 life depending on the hit. So that is something to consider. It gives you an extra turn to kind of set up your defenses and stuff like that. And lastly, the last point I want to make on sites is because of the fact that we just talked about how sometimes it will cause players to create suboptimal plays, there is the question that you must ask yourself, is a site a must kill? There are some times where your opponent plays the site and it scares the heck out of you and you're like, this really needs to get off the board now or I will lose to it. And there are other times where your opponent plays the site, you freak out, you're like, oh no. And then you look at the board and realize, hey, I can actually ignore this site and go for their face and it will put them at a huge disadvantage. And sometimes that will be the right play. A good sign of this is for aggro decks. Aggro decks, once again, taking a whole entire turn off to attack a site versus opponent's face is a huge thing, especially if they're in the lead. But if they are the lead, there might be the chance where the opponent plays, for example, a Howling Peak on 6 and they gun down one of your units and you're freaking out because they're going to get a mirror image next turn. But then you look at them and they are at sub 10 life, somewhere along maybe 7 or 8, and you realize that you get in this attack, you can either kill them or B, put them in a position where they are extremely low on life. So even if you might not kill them through damage the next turn, top decking some kind of burn or a charge unit is enough to take them out. Or you can just straight up kill them before the site even has a chance to make a difference. So that is something that you really want to take advantage of and to ask yourself every time. There are some times where it's 100% right to attack the site. There's sometimes where you want to avoid the site and go straight to the face. And there's sometimes where maybe you can take a turn off from the site, let it get one more activation, go for the face while you have the opening. And then as they play units, then go back towards the site or something like that. So yeah, guys, that is pretty much everything I have on sites for right now. It is a site survey. That's why I didn't go deep dive, because we didn't go too nitty gritty on the strategies and things like that. I will say in the comments below, let me know what your favorite site is and what experiences you've had with them, both in limited and constructed. I'd like to hear about it. I know the most popular ones are Regent's Tomb and Howling Peaks, but I would like to see, I have seen, I think every site, maybe except for EJthePodcast Workshop, seeing play in some form or fashion or another. Even Torgov saw some play in an event, and I thought it was funny because people were crafting them just for that event and never had a reason for them again. So yeah, let me know in the comments down below. what you think about it and stuff like that. And yeah. All right, guys. One last thing I want to mention before we close out the show is that when I am trying to put together that singleton format, as of the time of recording the show, it is 100 cards. You can only have one of each type except for the basic sigils. There is no limitations on color and stuff like that. But for budget considerations and stuff like that, to make this a little more interesting in deck building, there is a limit on rare / legendary cards you can have. So it is super pauper, kind of like pseudo pauper, kind of like a peasant type format where you can have commons and uncommons and then up to 8 legendaries and or rares in your deck. That's right. So if you are interested, by all means, check out the Discord, join there, join the EDH discussion, and we could talk about setting up games with other players and things like that. So let's go into our social media where you can contact me at. You can reach me at Twitter, Patreon, and YouTube at EJthePodcast. If you want to follow all my real life stuff, like my circus, my fire performing, my cosplay, and all those great things, you can hit me up on Instagram as CaesarLebear7. You can catch me live streaming some random evenings. I haven't set up a schedule on that one. And Tuesday and Saturday afternoons Central Time at twitch.tv/Jedi_EJ. The Discord is in the show notes, linked below, so definitely check it out because I haven't locked in a specific name yet. I don't think why it hasn't let me do it, but I'll update it. And then, of course, you can hit me up directly at EJthePodcast@gmail.com. Lastly, I want to give a special shout out to Limited Resources. They are the limited MTG podcast that I am pseudo kind of guiding or developing my structure for this podcast with. So I just wanted to give Marshall and LSV a quick shout out. And yeah, that's it. A little bit of a short and sweet one this week, guys. Hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, keep on gaming.